The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the convicted double murderers known as the Menendez brothers, who are now eligible for parole because of a unique law in California. Here's the story. Erik and Lyle Menendez, convicted in 1996 for the shocking 1989 murders of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in Beverly Hills, are at the center of a dramatic legal twist. Originally sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, a judge in May of 2025 resentenced them to 50 years to life, making them immediately eligible for parole under California's youth offender laws. In August of 2025, separate parole hearings were held via video conference in which the brothers made lengthy, emotional statements, admitting guilt, speaking of their childhood abuse, and describing how they tried to change in prison through education and rehabilitation. The parole board denied their release. Erik's misconduct in prison, unauthorized cell phone use, alleged gang ties was cited. Lyle's hearing the following day yielded a similar outcome. Now they must wait at least 3 years before reapplying. They'll get another chance. This isn't over. This is not over by a long shot. But now we are finally getting to hear some of the testimony from this parole hearing. For whatever reason, California didn't allow live coverage of all of it, but now we've got the audio of what was said, and specifically things that were said by Erik and Lyle. So during the course of this show, we're going to go through some of the statements and what Erik and Lyle had to say to the parole board. And we're going to begin with the brothers talking about the murders. Take a listen.
My purpose in getting the guns was to protect myself in case my father or my mother came at me to kill me, or my father came in the room to rape me. That is why I bought the guns. Telling Lyle and exposing the family secret, and my dad believing that we were going to go and tell other people, meant that our lives were in extreme danger immediately. So Lyle did not feel comfortable. If I wasn't leaving, he wanted to have a gun.
But you do see that there were other choices at that point.
I get that, looking back as a healthy individual today, that there were obviously other choices. When I look back at the 18-year-old that I was, and I don't mean to minimize it by saying I was 18, just the person I was then and what I believed about the world and my parents, running away was inconceivable. Running away meant death. That was never going to happen. It wouldn't matter where I was. My father sent me on tennis trips when I was 12. He didn't think that I was going to tell anybody or run away. He had no fear of that. He had trained me to believe that running away meant death. I knew it.
There was zero planning. There was no way to know that it was going to happen Sunday.
All right, so you just said, and you wrote this as well, the biggest mistake was buying the guns because it elevated things. And so you're saying the guns were strictly for protection.
Exactly. Really, mostly emotional protection, because I don't know that they would have been that useful if my brother was surprised somewhere or something happened in the house. We weren't carrying them around. There was a discussion more about what some of the more serious threats that my dad made, particularly in my life, if it ever got out. Some of the worst forms of the abuse that I hadn't been. He didn't tell me a lot of how bad it was on Tuesday like he was on Friday when we were driving. And that made me very panicked and more certain that something could happen, but not certain, and kind of fueled the decision, well, even though long guns are not very useful for protection, it's better than nothing. And so then we made the decision somewhat impulsively, but at some point, yes, let's just buy it. Let's just buy it.
What exactly is he saying there? What are they? What are they getting to here? I want to get to the first question in our investigation because I think it's an important one for someone who wants to get released. Is their explanation for murdering Jose credible? Whether it's the planning or lack of planning or the fear or the self-defense. Here to help answer that question is the host of Surviving the Survivor podcast, Joel Waldman, and criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Lindsay Richards. Great to have you both here. I'll start with you, Joel. What are you hearing from the brothers here? And do you find that all these years later, and they've got a real chance to get out. You know, it'll take another 3 years to take another shot at it. But what are your thoughts about their explanation here, as per Jose?
It's fascinating. I had not heard this, so to hear the audio from the parole hearings is really interesting, especially for me. And Vinny, I think I told you this before. I grew up in New Jersey playing tennis with the Menendez brothers at the East Brunswick Racket Club in New Jersey. So I have never been to their house, but I have friends from my hometown who were actually at their home in Princeton before they moved to Beverly Hills. And look, there was a party one time where someone spilled red wine on a white carpet, and the reaction from the brothers at that time when we were teenagers was, oh my God, my father's going to kill me. But it was really like, oh my God, my father is going to kill me, to the point that my friends were talking about it. And I used to see him at the tennis court. Granted, they were much better tennis players than I was. These guys were almost at a pro level, collegiate level for sure, D1. But there was something not right with the family. Everyone at the racket club knew that. People I knew were subpoenaed in the first trial. And so I think there is something there, but it's incredibly divisive and never okay to murder.
Yeah. What are you hearing here, Lindsay, from the brothers as they try to explain what was going on so many years ago?
You know, I think it's interesting in hearing this audio. They aren't taking, and I say this as a former prosecutor for many years, they aren't taking the accountability that I would have thought they would have for a parole hearing in terms of the premeditation. I think as a society, we've certainly evolved in our understanding of sexual abuse and emotional abuse and the impact that has on someone. And I think if this crime had occurred and this brutal murder had occurred in the midst of Jose coming into the room to potentially, engage in this kind of abuse, then it would make more sense that the murders occurred. But the way that they happened isn't quite lining up for me with the way that they are explaining this in this parole hearing.
Yeah, parole seems to, there's a couple of factors, right? There's the factors of what type of prisoner you are, but there's also a reckoning as to, taking some level of responsibility and coming clean, I think, is the word that comes to mind. Joel, because I still have a hard time when it always comes to the allegations against the mother. Like he literally said, I think it was Erik said, if my mother was going to come kill me, that's why I needed this weapon. My mother was going to come kill me. I don't know. To me, like I get the Jose, the animal, right? Jose, the abuser, the authoritarian, the one who's punishing them, perhaps physically, sexually, in every which way. But afraid that your mother's going to kill you?
Yeah, you make a great point. Look, this is to the other guest's point as well. Obviously, an astute prosecutor at one point, that's exactly what DA Nathan Hochman is saying. He's saying that these two men who were, very young men at the time, that they have not shown the remorse. And to her point, in this parole hearing, instead of saying, kind of overtly that we made a mistake, they're saying that they did buy the guns for protection. Now, I've heard horror stories about Kitty Menendez as well. She certainly turned a blind eye. If the abuse was happening, she turned a blind eye. There have been allegations against her of abuse as well. So this runs really deep. It's hard to discern the truth, especially after all these years. But Vinnie, as you know, new evidence has come forward with this Andy Cano letter and Roy Rossello from the Menudo brothers. So, or from Menudo. And so, there's a lot out there to be sorted through. And whether they deserve to be out or not is a judge's decision at this point. A judge has not granted it.
Yeah. They're not getting a new trial either. Lindsay, is there coaching involved when it's time to go to a parole hearing? Because I know when it's time to go to trial, a lawyer and their client will talk about, how to act. You might do a mock cross-examination, things like that. Does the same thing happen in a parole hearing, or is it really incumbent upon the defendants themselves?
I don't believe the preparation is the same as if it was a trial, but certainly they're going to be prepped on what a parole board is looking for. And just like we were talking about, accountability is a huge part of that. And I do seem to think that if they had gone in and said, yes, we suffered this horrific abuse, and we really just had enough and made this horrible decision and this horrible choice, that might have been a bit more appealing to the parole board as far as their accountability is concerned than anything else. So it's interesting. I wonder if they kind of change their tactic in a few years when they have another chance.
Yeah. Okay. Stand by. Our guests are staying with us. When we come back, is their explanation for murdering Kitty credible?
I was giving him ammunition, and we were just loading as fast as possible.
The Court TV podcast will return.
She told me that if I would have kept my mouth shut, things might have worked out in the family.
What did you think that meant?
That meant that things had not worked out in the family, and I believed that she was going to kill us.
Getting back to Kitty, the mother of the Menendez brothers, they have kind of stuck with it that she was going to kill us. They felt like their mother was going to kill them. Now, remember, at this point, they are of adult age. They're not little kids. They're not 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 9, 7. Not even, they're not even in high school. They're beyond that, college and beyond at that point, and they're big athletic guys. So what is mom going to do? Is mom going to shoot them? I'm not sure. So here at the parole hearing, Erik and Lyle are speaking about the murder of their mother. And remember, the order of things is that Jose is shot and killed first before his mother. Let's listen now to, all these years later, Erik and Lyle here attempting to get released on parole, talking about the murder of their mom, Kitty.
Why kill mom?
I saw my mom, when my mom told me on Thursday that she had known all of those years, it was the most devastating moment in my entire life. It changed everything for me. And it changed the way I had been protecting her by not telling her. When she told me on Thursday that she knew I saw her and Dad, my mom all my life had been my dad's ally, telling my dad everything that I did wrong, watching me get whipped in front of her.
You had no thought about rescuing your mom at all?
A series of incidents told me that my mom would not just not take our side, but egg him on. When I found one of my mom's suicide notes, I called my brother and said, Mom's going to commit suicide. We need to do something. My brother had gone to my mom. This was a few years before, and said, leave Dad. We'll leave with you. We'll go back to New Jersey. And my mom said, I'm never leaving your father. Your father is a great man, and I'm his wife, and that's who I am. Step by step, my mother had shown that she was united with my dad, but I still didn't believe she knew. And when I found out that she knew, I no longer saw him and her as different. They were different. She was his victim. I should have known that. I should have separated it in my mind. But at that night, I saw them as one person.
Did your mother also make the statement to you during that time period, you and Erik, leading up to the shootings, that you had ruined the family? And how did that contribute to your fear and hypervigilance?
Well, a couple of times. Wednesday, she acted like she knew, told my brother, "You think I'm stupid? Of course I knew." And honestly, I didn't think I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that she knew. So it had an impact, but I had a fantasy that she didn't really know. And then she was making statements like, we came back Saturday night after the fishing trip and the door was locked, so she had to come down to open it, that I ruined this family. Erik ruined it by not keeping his mouth shut, I think just telling me. And so the past tense of it made me just, she was talking about the family in the past tense. And then right before the shooting, that was the first time all four of us were together. So when my dad ordered Erik up to the room, she wasn't doing anything to help. And I think that's when I kind of just collapsed.
And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Is their explanation for murdering Kitty credible? Doesn't make sense. Still with us, helping us with our investigation tonight, host of Surviving the Survivor podcast, Joel Waldman, and criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, Lindsay Richards. Lindsay, I've always had the biggest problem with Kitty, and I've been saying it all night already, but every time I cover this story, because if this whole scenario is Jose is the monster, once the monster is taken out, what is Kitty going to do? What can Kitty do? From my perspective, and you can agree or disagree, the only thing she could do is testify against them and control all their money.
I completely agree. And I think in the original trial, that was the strongest part of the prosecution's case. And frankly, it kind of still is. I mean, in hearing the audio too, their explanations are not what we thought they were, because before it was, I was scared mom, was going to kill us. And that's not the story now. And even though we can understand that their anger at her, knowing about this alleged horrific sexual abuse, of course we can understand the anger, but it does not justify the brutality of that murder. And it sounds like they were just mad at her. They were just angry that she let this happen, and so they killed her. And that is a brutal murder.
Yeah, they had to reload, Joel. They had to reload to take out Kitty. And I get that if they are victims of all this abuse for all these years, that they're probably a little bit warped upstairs. But that's not where we are. We're not in a sanity defense. We're not anywhere near there. We're at a parole hearing for convicted double murderers. What are your thoughts about the Menendez brothers and their mom?
I just want to be clear. You can't go out and murder anyone just because they did something to you, no matter how nefarious or wrong it was at the time. That includes both Jose and Kitty. With that said, I was just thinking, I'm not a psychologist. Both my parents were. But listening to them talk, and I think it was Lyle basically describing right there about how he viewed his parents as one entity. I just don't think there's any way for someone who's not in a position like they claim to have been in to really understand this. I know Dr. Ann Burgess, who's a literal living legend and a criminal profiler, she interviewed Erik Menendez prior to the first trial. A lot of people don't know there was a mistrial, and they were tried again. And she, her findings were that he was absolutely telling the truth. But to your point, Vinny, they pumped 6 shots into Jose, but 10 shotgun shots into Kitty and one to the back of the skull, which seems awfully excessive. It's just such a depraved crime and apparently such a deranged family all around and dysfunctional. It's just tough to tell what was in their mind at the time.
Yeah. I'm wondering, as we sit here, Lindsay, where they are, like mentally, like do they believe that they're going to get out? I mean, to come to this point where they are, from facing the death penalty to life without the possibility of parole, to everything that's transpired in the last year or so, to this point, and then being, denied parole, do you think that they will turn things around? And do you think that they will, and when I say turn things around, I mean like live this amazingly productive, clean life behind bars for the next 3 years?
I think they're going to try, certainly. I mean, I think at this point there's enough that's been granted to give them hope. The fact that they've even gotten this far in this process to say that they're eligible for parole at this point, they have hope. And if they're smart, and I think they are smart guys, they're going to stay on the straight and narrow while they're incarcerated, and they are going to make sure that they say to that parole board in that next hearing exactly what they are needing to say and what that parole board wants to hear.
Yeah, and Joel, I think going through it once, I think the next time around, 3 years from now, we may see something a little different in the approach, and we may see something different in how they comport themselves behind bars for the next 3 years.
100%. I mean, they're going to have to be on their best behavior. And I think for the most part, they have been. One of the things that has not been talked about is after this latest sort of rejection from the judge denying parole or a new trial, I should say, Lyle actually took to Facebook. And I don't know how I feel about that. He basically was campaigning, saying the fight's not over. He was upset with the judge. The tone there is interesting to me because it almost sounds like a politician, right? And I think that the tenor has to be much different for them moving forward, especially with the political landscape the way it is. I mean, DA Nathan Hochman is not giving an inch and is basically telling them, you've got to show remorse here. You've got to apologize. If I'm those two brothers, I'm going overboard with the apologies and the remorse now. I'm not going to Facebook to protest the judge's decision.
Yeah, it seems like that's the right road. Joel, you should be advising these, I was going to say young men. They're not young men. They're almost my age. All right, big thank you to Joel Waldman and Lindsay Richards. Appreciate it. Great insight. Up next, does one brother deserve to be released more than the other?
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the double murderers, Erik and Lyle Menendez, who are trying desperately to get out of prison and had an opportunity to plead their cases. Here's the story. On a summer night in 1989, Beverly Hills was shattered by the brutal slaying of Jose and Kitty Menendez. Behind the mansion's gilded gates, their sons, Erik and Lyle, executed a crime that would haunt America. Armed with shotguns, the brothers unleashed a barrage of bullets. Lyle firing first into his father, a man he claimed was domineering and abusive. Erik followed, targeting his mother as chaos filled the room. At trial, prosecutors painted them as greedy heirs, eager to inherit a fortune. The defense countered with harrowing allegations of years of emotional and sexual abuse, offering motive beyond money. Lyle was portrayed as the dominant orchestrator, Erik as the obedient, broken accomplice. Their convictions in 1996 sealed their fate, life in prison without parole. But now, because of California law, they are eligible for parole. And we're taking a listen to what they told the parole board in their denial. We'll have another opportunity, but we're taking a listen to what they said in this plea to be released from prison on parole in a case where at one point they were facing the death penalty. So let's take a listen to Erik Menendez right here talking about his alcohol and drug use.
I used alcohol and drugs. Well, marijuana I began to use because of my Crohn's disease, but I used it because I was miserable. I was depressed. I was miserable. I was doing life without in prison, 600 miles away from my family. That was just in LA. The rest of my family was on the East Coast. And I was, if I could numb my sadness with alcohol, I was going to do it. If I could numb it with anything else. The drugs that are in my file, it's only because I was limited and there weren't other ones available. I would have taken other drugs to numb that pain.
All right. In the parole hearings, the brothers talk about their infractions while in prison, and part of what they said in Erik's hearing was, contrary to your supporters' beliefs, you have not been a model prisoner. And frankly, we find that a little disturbing. Barton said, that's the parole commissioner, there was a list of infractions, including allegations that he worked with a prison gang, bought drugs, used cell phones, and helped with a tax scam. The repeated use of a cell phone was selfish and a sign of Menendez believing that rules don't apply to him, Barton said. Now, this is what was said relative to Lyle at his hearing. Commissioners noted that the older brother is still displaying antisocial personality traits like deception, minimization, and rule breaking that lie beneath that positive surface. Similar to his brother's hearing the day before, the panel zeroed in on Lyle Menendez's use of cell phones in prison as recent as March of 2025. Take a listen here to Lyle talking about that during the parole hearing.
And then I moved to transfer to be with my brother in 2018, all the way across the state to San Diego. She was in Sacramento. So now I'm not visiting with her. I'm not able to have private conversations with her in visiting. And there's a lot of stress in the marriage. And so when I landed and the phones were available, it was just very tempting to use it. I clearly should not have, and none of it is an excuse for it. And I'm sure she would agree with me. We wish we had not.
You lost your family visit privilege, correct?
Right. That was one of the consequential things that really was a wake-up call. It started the awakening of, like, I need to figure this out.
But then you did it again. I mean, and yes,
right.
You've said you had them nonstop throughout that time. With your second one, you actually lost it not for just a year this time, but for 3 years, right?
Right.
So here you see the parole board going at them saying, well, listen, everyone's talking about model prisoners, and they're saying not exactly. But these are two individuals. They're not a team. They're not attached to one another. They are brothers. They both are double murderers, and they committed the murders together. However, they are unique individuals, and that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Does one brother deserve to be released more than the other? Is there a difference here in either what they're saying, how they're acting, what they did? Here to help answer that question, former state attorney, Palm Beach County, Florida, a friend of Dave Arenberg is with us. Also joining us, digital journalist Justin Shepard, who worked with the family of the Menendez brothers. Thank you both for being here. Justin, I'll begin with you. From your perspective, is there a difference, whether it's in the culpability, the roles that they had, the lives they have led behind bars, what they said at their parole hearings?
So I think that's a great question. And my answer to that is I believe that they both deserve an equal chance at release. They were tried together. Don't forget, They've also served 36 years at this point, and they've individually created incredible programs and initiatives in the service of others, some of which have been adopted by the entire state of California. The other thing to kind of say to this is that, not that it excuses the behavior, but first, when you look at the cell phones, the question is, who brings those cell phones in? Yes, they're using it, but who brings them in? The other thing, too, is that until May of this year, they were looking at never getting out. So why did they care? That's not that, again, it excuses it, but gives a little bit more insight into that.
Who does bring them in? Are you saying the guards?
The COs bring them in, yes.
All right, Dave Arenberg, let me ask you, do you see a difference between Erik and Lyle, and does one deserve it more or less than the other?
Well, Vinnie, if you just look at their conduct behind bars, you would think that Lyle has been better. He was found to have antisocial disorder, but yet Erik was the one who was using drugs behind bars, including heroin, was part of a prison gang that did tax fraud, was drinking alcohol, had the cell phone just like Lyle. So if you want to know who was better, Lyle was better behind bars. To me, though, Lyle was worse as far as their conduct during this whole matter, in that he was the one who reloaded the shotgun and went back in to murder their mother, Kitty, as she's crawling away. She had not died right away. And it was Lyle who was the one to put the shotgun right to her head and blew her brains out. There was so much blood there on the scene that the cops thought it was a mob hit. So if you want to go by whose actions were worse during the crime, I would say it's Lyle. If you want to go by who's been a better prisoner behind bars, it's Lyle. So it's a question of which you want to look at. I would say they both should stay behind bars. And I agree, they should both be treated equally in this matter, but I would have denied parole for both of them.
Let me ask you, Justin, psychologically, where are they right now? Are they in a place where, okay, they feel like, okay, we've got these next 3 years to change, to do something? Or is it going to be sort of a continuum because they believe everything they've done to this point should have gotten them released?
Well, I don't know if they anticipated that they were going to get released the first go around. I believe in California, when you hit the parole board, you have a 13% chance of getting released your first go around, and that's not including murder, and that's not including the notoriety that this case holds. From what I understand through the family is that they plan to, over the next several months, years, whatever it is, to be squeaky clean and make sure that they dot all their I's, cross all their T's, and they're just absolutely model inmates to try to not blow the parole hearing when they are ready to meet in front of the parole board again. So I think that their mindset is one of hope and one that, hey, we're going to get it next time.
Dave Arenberg, putting aside the punishment that I think I agree with you. Like, for me, I draw the line at murder, right? Like, no second chances, but California provides those second chances under the California law. Do you believe that they would be a danger if they got out to the rest of society, putting aside the punishment for the crime, but just if they did get out, would you be concerned?
I wouldn't, Vinny. I agree with the estimation that they're low risk. I would still not let them out anytime soon, but not because I thought they were a threat to society. I agree with you that the crimes were so heinous. And remember, although California law allows them to get out, that's not what the jury was told. The jury at the time was presented with the choice of death, the death penalty, or life without parole. They chose life without parole. They thought life without parole meant life without parole. It was only changed many years later by a judge and with the help of Kim Kardashian and all the celebrities who piled on because of supposedly good behavior behind bars. And the parole board called them out for it and said, maybe you weren't the model prisoners that we all thought you were. So I do think that they will eventually get out. It's just not yet.
All right, our guests are going to stay with us when we come back. What role should their family have on the brothers getting parole?
Their actions, while tragic, were the desperate response of two boys trying to survive the unspeakable cruelty of their father.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
I've known Lyle and Erik my whole life. I can tell you without a doubt that they are not the villains they've been portrayed as. They were boys, young, scared, and abused by their father in ways no child should ever experience. You, the media, focused so much on their actions, but they never were able to tell the full story of their abuse that drove them to such desperate measures.
There is one of the family members, and this is a fascinating case, right? Because it's a family murder. You have children murdering their parents, and so many times in a murder trial that we cover on Court TV, you know, the victims will be the children of who's been murdered or the parents of who's been murdered. But here, that doesn't apply. So you have other family members coming forward, nephews, nieces, aunts, sisters, brothers, people like that. So let's take a listen to some Menendez family members who testified on behalf of the brothers at the parole hearing.
It breaks my heart now to look back to see the difference in how our parents treated us. My parents full of love and encouragement, while his parents ruled with pressure and intimidation. They embodied the principle of first is first and second is last. Even as a child, I didn't want to play card games with my uncle because he cheated. Even against children, first was first, second was last.
I can see and understand totally why they did what they did. Because I lived part of that abuse. I mean, where I was, it's in my writings, where I was punished by Jose so drastically for a simple thing that Kitty lied about again, that I was put in my room for 24 hours. I couldn't use the bathroom. I was only fed a sandwich, bag of chips, and water. They made it a prison, what they basically did.
Many times, the voice of the victims, the surviving members of the family in a murder case where the murderers are up for parole, have such a strong voice. And oftentimes that voice is, don't let these killers out. Here we have a role reversal for family members who are speaking out. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. What role should their family have on the brothers getting parole? Right? They're advocating for the release, the ones who are speaking now. Here to help with our investigation, still with us, former state attorney, Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Arenberg, and digital journalist Justin Shepard, who has worked with the family of the Menendez brothers. Justin, how do you see the role of the family at this point, and what are their thoughts, and have they always been of that mindset?
So, you know, the law defines the role. It's called Marcy's Law. And I think, you know, people forget how much of an impact that this would have on a family. It could tear them apart. And clearly this family has found a way towards forgiveness, and they're advocating for them, which, like you said, this is very non-typical for a family to do this. Normally they're there, keep them in, don't let them out. But every single living family member, including Kitty and Jose's own siblings, are advocating for their release. They don't believe that they're a threat to society anymore. And I think that their voices should carry just as much weight as any other victims, given the situation. But you're absolutely right. It's completely reversed from what's typical.
Dave Arenberg, what are your thoughts about the impact? What impact should the families' voices have?
Yeah, Justin's right. Prosecutors will and should consider the victims' families, because they, according to Marcy's Law, must be heard. Now, you don't have to go their way. Ultimately, prosecutors represent the people. That's why it's the state versus Menendez brothers, or the people versus Menendez brothers, not the family of the victims, because it's the prosecutor's discretion, their decision, and they have to look for principles of justice for the whole community. I must say that the families do make a very powerful statement when they come together like this, but it's not unanimous. Kitty's brother, his name was Milton Anderson. He was staunchly opposed to the release of the Menendez brothers. He passed away recently, so now all the family members are on one side, and it should be taken into consideration, but it's not the only consideration.
Now I want to take a listen to DA Nathan Hochman, who held a press conference after a huge decision involving the Menendez brothers' attempt to get a new trial.
The evidence alleged here is not so compelling that it would have produced a reasonable doubt in the mind of at least one juror. That is how deficient, how meritless, how baseless the evidence that has been presented by the Menendez brothers has been in this habeas motion. So Judge Ryan has put a full kibosh on the habeas motion here. So now we have the resentencing/parole course has not resulted in the Menendez being released. The next parole hearing is scheduled for 3 years, although the parole board could advance it.
All right, Justin, what was the reaction to this huge decision for the family and the Menendez brothers?
I think that they were very disappointed in this decision. They were hoping to possibly get a new trial with what they're considering new evidence. From what I understand, from the second trial, a lot of the abuse allegations weren't allowed in, and they were hoping that with some of the things that have come forward in recent years, that would allow them to have this new trial, allow the habeas corpus to go through. And obviously they're disappointed and now looking towards Governor Newsom's office as basically being their last resort outside of the parole.
Now, that's true. The governor at any moment could do it himself, right? Dave Arenberg, is this the... Everyone at home is wondering, is this the end of the litigation? Are we just in a world now of parole, no parole, or some form of a commutation by the governor? Like, has the legal thing run its course, or is there always a chance that there could be another motion, another day in court for the Menendez brothers?
I think it's still going on. They could still get habeas relief. They're still trying to challenge the guilty verdict at trial by the fact that they were not allowed to bring up the abuse allegations in the second trial. Of course, remember, the abuse was never mentioned to the therapist, at least not at first, by the Menendez brothers. It was mentioned later, so their stories changed, which is why Nathan Hochman, I think, is skeptical of it. And Nathan Hochman sent them a path to release. You have to just express remorse, admit you did it, and stop with all the other excuses. But the Menendez brothers are sticking to their story, and they're not going to take that pathway. So until that happens, I think they're going to stay behind bars, and then the next stop will be realistically 3 years from now.
Yeah, and obviously Court TV will be on top of it. Dave Arenberg, great to see you. Thank you so much. Justin Shepard, really appreciate your time and your insight. It helped us out a lot tonight. We thank you. You know, to me, what the Menendez brothers did was premeditated, cold-blooded murder, right? They went out, they bought the shotguns, they planned it, they lied to cover it all up, and they have shown very little acceptance of responsibility or remorse for what they have done. And as we've pointed out here, they have not exactly been model prisoners through the years, but they've been better than the overwhelming majority of other prisoners. Still, despite all this, I believe it's just a matter of time before the folks in California set these killers free. We'll see what happens in 2028. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.